Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and Tears, Came After Clues, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Scream Behind Glass. A woman's scream tore through the corridors of Blackheath Manor like glass shattering under pressure, sharp, high, and horrifyingly human. It did not echo. It stuck, suspended in the dense silence that followed, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. Poirot paused at the threshold of the drawing room, his gloved hand resting lightly on the brass doorknob. In that frozen moment, a grandfather clock ticked once, twice, a third time. Then footsteps thundered down the upper landing. More panicked voices, doors flung open. But no glass was broken, no figure appeared. No one came running from the source of that dreadful sound. The drawing room, warm with lamplight and the faint perfume of roses, remained undisturbed. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured softly. "A scream, Hastings, but no screamer." Captain Hastings, already flustered, burst in behind him. "You heard it too, didn't you? That couldn't have been nothing, Poirot." Poirot merely nodded, his keen eyes scanning the ornate French windows. They were shut tight. The curtains stirred slightly, but only from the evening breeze that found its way under the crack of the heavy doors. There was no broken glass, no trace of blood, and yet the scream had not been imagined. Poirot, more than anyone, knew the difference between silence and suppression. The guests were summoned quickly. Lady Darnley, mistress of the house and recent widow, descended the grand staircase with glacial composure, her pale blue gown trailing like smoke. Her fingers, delicate and ringless, were clasped tightly together. She looked not surprised, but prepared. "Was anyone outside?" she asked, her voice even. Too even. "No one," answered Colonel Venn, the war-scarred estate manager who'd once served in India and now paced like a caged jackal. "I checked the garden myself. The grounds are locked. Every gate shut. Nothing's disturbed." "But someone screamed," muttered Miss Celeste Rain, the artist with wild auburn curls and wide, glassy eyes. "I heard it clearly. A woman, and not from far." Poirot studied her carefully. Her arms were wrapped about herself, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. She looked as though she'd seen something before she'd heard it, but wasn't ready to say what. The housekeeper, Mrs. Grange, appeared next, stoic, grey-haired, and loyal to the Darnley family for 30 years. Her keys jingled softly with every step. She announced, "All staff accounted for." Cook was in the cellar, maid was setting the upstairs linen. "Nobody's gone missing." Poirot's eyes sharpened at that. "And yet, someone screamed, madame." The human voice is not easily mistaken, especially in pain. Hastings pulled Poirot aside. "What do you think it was, old man? A prank? Some hysterical fit?" Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the stained glass transom above the door. "No, that was not the cry of jest. It was of terror, but also of betrayal, I think. Subtle, deep. One does not scream like that unless they see something they should not see." Lady Darnley insisted on brandy for all, a nervous ritual in place of action. The guests congregated in the drawing room, murmuring theories and glancing at one another with growing suspicion. The fire crackled politely, as though unaware it had become the room's only warmth. Poirot moved quietly, as he always did. He noticed the faintest smear on the windowsill, a small thumbprint, pressed in something waxy. Lipstick? He examined it with his handkerchief and tucked the clue away. A tiny thing. Most would miss it. He did not. Colonel Venn lit a cigar with unshaking fingers. "This house has been restless since Edgar died," he said, unprompted. Even before that, he suspected things. His study was searched last week. He thought someone was reading his correspondence. "And now he is dead, yes?" Poirot asked gently. "2 months ago, was it not? And the manner?" "Stroke," Venn replied curtly. "In the library, slumped over his desk." Poirot made a note of that. "And tonight, a scream. No body, no damage, only this sense of disquiet. Tell me, did Edgar ever suspect someone in this room?" Lady Darnley's eyes flicked, just once toward Celeste, then quickly away. Poirot caught the glance. "So, did Celeste?" "What are you implying?" Celeste said suddenly. "That I have something to do with this. Edgar liked me. He bought my art. He said I reminded him of something beautiful." "A painting may be beautiful," Poirot said softly, "and still forged." Silence. Then Mrs. Grange entered again, stiff-backed. "Mr. Poirot, we've checked every room, every door. All the staff confirm no one is missing." He nodded. "Then the mystery is greater than we feared. For if the scream came from no one, then someone is hiding." That night, the Manor did not sleep. Poirot stayed awake in his chamber, sipping chocolate and watching the moonlight bend through the frosted glass. He thought of the scream, the lipstick on the sill, and the way Lady Darnley's hands trembled when she poured the brandy, only for herself. At 3:02, a shadow passed beneath his door. Poirot did not move. The next morning, breakfast was subdued. Lady Darnley did not appear. When the maid finally knocked, there was no answer. The door to her room was locked from the inside. Mrs. Grange retrieved the spare key. Lady Darnley was found on the floor, in front of her vanity, her head tilted at a strange angle, her face pale as porcelain. But she was not dead. "Drugged," Poirot said immediately. "Something strong. Enough to knock her unconscious, but not fatal. Ah, no, not yet." Beside her lay a single object, a silver music box, shattered at the hinge. Inside it, tucked under the lining, was a blood-stained earring. Poirot picked it up with his tweezers, turning it slowly. "This," he murmured, "belonged to someone who did not scream last night. But it may tell us who did." Now the house was properly afraid. Colonel Venn barked for the police to be called. Celeste retreated to the garden to smoke with shaking hands. Mrs. Grange muttered about omens and ghosts, but Poirot saw none of these things. He saw people, their flaws, their patterns. In the study, he requested access to Edgar Darnley's desk. Mrs. Grange, reluctantly, produced the key. Inside were letters, neatly bound, dated and sorted, but one slot was empty. Labeled February 10th, 1937. Hastings noticed it first. "Odd," he said. "That's the date Edgar died, isn't it?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed. Curious. If that letter is missing, it may be because it did not suit the narrative of a peaceful death." Later that day, Poirot asked to speak with Celeste privately. They met in the conservatory. "You and Lady Darnley," he said carefully. We're not always friends, were you? Celeste looked startled, then defensive. She hated me, thought I was here for her husband's money. But that wasn't it. Edgar liked people around him, artists, thinkers. I was his distraction, not his threat. Poirot leaned closer. But someone thought otherwise. Celeste exhaled slowly. She told me once, if I ever betrayed the house, she'd make sure no one remembered my name. That's what she said, word for word, like she meant it. That evening, the missing letter was found. Folded inside the lining of a book in the library, it bore the seal of Lady Darnley. Addressed to Edgar, unsigned, but unmistakably her hand. It read, "If you name her in the will, you will destroy everything. She is not who she says she is." Celeste was brought in again. She did not cry. But Poirot, with eyes soft and accusing, said, "Mademoiselle, who were you before you became Celeste Rain?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, "Not even my mother remembered. She called me Elise. Elise Darnley." Hastings gasped. Poirot only nodded. "Edgar's illegitimate daughter," Poirot said quietly. "Hidden, unspoken, and now returned. But why under false name?" "To see if he would know me," she whispered. "To see if he'd claim me." "And he did," Poirot said. "In his will." She nodded. "And now," he said gently, "someone wishes you gone. Someone who knew. Someone who screamed not out loud, but in silence, when they realized what you were." Lady Darnley awoke later that night in a haze. She confessed nothing, but the earring in the box, it was hers, and the lipstick on the window matched only one color in the house. Bleeding rose, Celeste's, yet Celeste never wore it. Poirot stood by the window as the night closed in again. "So you see, Hastings," he murmured, "sometimes the scream does not come from the victim, but from the one who sees their world unravel." She tried to scare Celeste, tried to frighten her away, but it was she who broke. Outside, rain began to fall, slow, steady, relentless, and Poirot added, almost to himself, "Ah, but human nature, mon ami, it never screams without reason." Chapter 2. A teacup left untouched. It was the silence after laughter that made Poirot sit up straight. Not a dramatic silence, no, something subtler, the kind of hush that follows a moment you don't yet realize was important. The drawing room had filled with the genteel clatter of china and murmurs of polite conversation. Cups had been lifted, biscuits passed, steam curled into the amber light from the fire. And then, nothing, not quite nothing. There was the tick of the long case clock, the clink of a teaspoon, and Poirot's eyes, narrowing on a porcelain cup that had not moved. 12 guests, 11 sips, one untouched teacup, pale blue with a gold rim, the sort kept at the edge of service, used, but only for someone of rank, someone like Miss Eleanor Vale. And Miss Vale was not in the room. "Ah," Poirot murmured, softly but with unmistakable certainty, "that is how a ghost reveals itself. Not in a crash, Hastings, but in the cup that remains." Full Hastings frowned, halfway through his own tea. "You mean Eleanor?" "Just so. She has not drunk, and yet no one noticed her leave." Poirot stood, smoothing the front of his waistcoat. "This is not the vanishing of a woman. It is the reappearance of a lie." They searched the manor first, quietly, then loudly, then with dread. The west wing was empty, her room untouched. The garden paths glistened with early frost, and not a single footprint, Not even a fox had disturbed the gravel. She left no trail, Hastings muttered, but someone must have seen her leave. Poirot remained still. No, my friend, she did not leave. Colonel Venn arrived again, summoned in haste. He'd been exercising the horses and smelled of saddle leather and sweat. Another ghost, Poirot? Or is this one flesh and blood? Poirot did not answer. Instead, he walked back to the drawing room and examined the untouched cup. The tea inside had cooled, but not congealed. No sugar, no milk. She did not drink, that is certain, and yet she poured. Perhaps she was called away, offered Mrs. Grange, clutching her keys tighter, or felt unwell. Eleanor is delicate. She is clever, Poirot corrected gently, and clever women do not disappear by accident. Celeste, still nervously sketching by the window, did not look up. You don't think she's been taken? Poirot looked at her for a long moment. I think if she had been taken, there would be signs. A scuffle, a scream, and none of those. No. This is something different, something chosen. Lady Darnley had not come down at all. Still recovering from her fainting fit, the physician insisted. But Poirot had a suspicion that the illness was as convenient as it was theatrical. Still, she remained above, present in silence, if not in sight. The search widened. The attic, the wine cellar, even the chapel on the far end of the estate. No Eleanor. But in the third-floor linen closet, something odd, a small, torn scrap of silk. Celeste was the first to identify it. Eleanor's scarf, she said, almost whispering. She wore it last night. Green. It had a little silver pin, shaped like a bird. The pin was not found. Poirot took the fabric gently and tucked it into an envelope. A trace. And traces are like breadcrumbs, but some are meant to lead you astray. Do you think she faked her disappearance? Hastings asked. I think, Poirot replied, that someone needed her to disappear and left just enough to suggest the opposite. Later that evening, a letter appeared on the hallway table. It had not been there before. Mrs. Grange swore she hadn't seen it all day. It was addressed in fine script, to whom it may concern. Inside, a single sentence, written in blue ink. She knew what she saw. Colonel Venn turned pale. This is becoming absurd. Poirot turned the paper gently in his fingers. And yet, this is not the writing of Miss Vale. No, the pressure is uneven, the style masculine but disguised. Who would want to frighten us? Celeste asked. Or perhaps, Poirot said softly, they are trying to justify something. A guilt before the crime. But the crime, it seemed, had not yet come. Only the absence, only the cold cup. At dinner, the guests sat awkwardly. Miss Vale's absence was addressed, but delicately. Colonel Venn said nothing. Celeste picked at her food, and Mrs. Grange served, without meeting anyone's eyes. Poirot, ever observant, watched hands and glances more than mouths. Halfway through the meal, Hastings leaned toward him. What is it, Poirot? You've barely touched your soup. I am thinking of the sugar bowl, Poirot whispered. The sugar… what? It was half full this morning. Now it is empty, and yet only 3 guests take sugar. That suggests someone used it for something else. The next morning, the scream returned, but this one came from a throat that still existed. Mrs. Grange, shrieking in the parlor, clutching her apron. The window was open, the frost was disturbed, and on the floor, the silver bird pin. Blood stained its edge. Poirot moved swiftly. Fetch no one, he ordered. Close the room. This is a message." Celeste entered behind him, her eyes wide. "Blood. Is she—" Poirot did not reply. He took the pin in his handkerchief and examined the droplets. "Still fresh," he said, "but not arterial. A nick, meant to suggest more than it is." Colonel Venn arrived minutes later. "This has gone far enough," he snapped. "We must alert the authorities." "And what would we tell them, mon colonel?" Poirot asked calmly. "That a woman vanished, a cup was left untouched, and now a trinket has returned with theatre. No, this is not the work of a madman. This is a play, and someone is rehearsing their crime." Poirot retired to the study that afternoon. There he studied the letter again, then the teacup. Then he had Hastings bring the shoes of every guest. "Shoes?" Hastings asked, bewildered. "Yes," Poirot said, "because, my friend, there are two kinds of liars, those who clean too much and those who forget their souls." And sure enough, Colonel Venn's right heel had traces of powdered sugar pressed into the stitching. "Sugar," Poirot said, "and blood. A recipe most unpleasant." He confronted Venn alone. The colonel did not deny it. "She knew," he said. "She saw me in the study. With the letter. Edgar never meant to leave it to me. He found out I forged the check last year. She overheard, threatened to expose it." "And so you silenced her?" Poirot asked. "No," Venn shouted. "I scared her. Told her to leave. To run before she ruined everything. She said she would go, said she'd disappear. That was 2 days ago." Poirot's gaze was heavy. "And the pin? The blood?" "She sent it," Venn said, "to frighten me, to keep me silent." But Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, the sugar, why on your shoe?" Venn blinked. I spilled it when I wrote the letter." "No," Poirot said, "because the sugar was mixed with something bitter, a crushed compound, one used to sedate." That night, the truth broke. Miss Vale's body was found at the bottom of the old dry well, just past the garden wall. Her wrists were bruised, her mouth stained faintly with red. Poison, slipped in tea she never drank, but poured. She knew. Poirot gathered them all in the drawing room. "One among you," he said, "killed her. But not with violence, with precision, with fear, with pressure." He turned to Celeste. "The lipstick," he said, "the same shade on her mouth. But you never wore that color. She borrowed it. You gave it willingly." Celeste broke. "She asked for it that night. Said she had to look composed, that someone was going to challenge her. And so," Poirot said softly, "she armed herself with confidence, not knowing the tea was already poisoned." And finally, Poirot turned to the one person who had not moved during the entire speech. "Lady Darnley, you were not ill," he said. "You were watching. Always watching. You knew what Edgar did, knew what Eleanor would do, and when the colonel's threat failed, you acted." She smiled coldly. "She was nothing," she said, "a bastard child. An echo of a lie I lived with for 20 years, and I will not apologize." Poirot bowed his head. "No, you will not, but you will be remembered. Not as the woman scorned, but as the woman who killed in silence." As she was taken, Poirot returned to the cup, still untouched, still full, and whispered, almost to himself, "It is always the quietest cup that holds the most poison." Chapter 3. The Note That Changed Nothing. It was Hastings who opened the envelope first, and it was his face, not the message, that told Poirot something was terribly wrong. His hand had frozen midway, the letter pinched between 2 fingers like it might explode. The rain outside tapped lightly against the window panes, a gentle rhythm that only emphasized the unnatural stillness in the room. Poirot stood, crossing the study floor slowly, each step echoing with quiet precision. He took the envelope, glanced once at the seal, unbroken until moments ago, and slid the note from within. There were only 6 words, written in a careful, neat hand. "She will die before dinner." The clock ticked behind them, 4:17 p.m., and the woman in question was already dead. Miss Eleanor Vale, the missing guest from the previous day, whose body had only just been pulled from the dry well beneath the withered hedgerows, her mouth tinged faintly with poison and silence. Poirot turned the note, slowly, letting the light catch the ink. It was dated, yesterday, 9 a.m. It had arrived today. "So it's useless," Hastings muttered, pacing behind him. "Too late. It tells us nothing we didn't already know." "No, mon ami," Poirot said quietly, folding the paper with deliberate care. "It tells us everything." Colonel Venn and Mrs. Grange were summoned immediately. They arrived together, though Poirot had noted with curiosity that they had been speaking in hushed tones outside the dining hall when the messenger boy from the village delivered the letter just after tea. Celeste followed, not long after, looking paler than usual, her fingers stained with charcoal from sketching, she said, in the conservatory. The note lay in the center of the long dining table, like a snake coiled for judgment. "I trust none of you recognize this handwriting?" Poirot asked gently. Colonel Venn grunted. "Too tidy for my taste. Could be anyone." "Indeed," Poirot said. "A tidy hand, but masculine. Left-handed. Note how the angle of the T's curve against the grain. And the envelope, it was sealed with wax, yes, but broken easily. Low quality, rushed." Celeste leaned closer. Why would someone write that, if she was already dead? Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Ah, mademoiselle, that is the question, n'est-ce pas? Because there are only 2 possibilities. Either the note arrived too late by accident, or exactly on time by design." Mrs. Grange clutched the silver crucifix at her neck. "But the boy from the post, he said it was delivered with the morning mail. I swear on the soul of my father, Mr. Poirot, no one tampered with it." Poirot nodded slowly. "No one tampered with the delivery. But what of the dispatch?" They questioned the boy, Albie, a freckled lad from the village who remembered picking up the post from Havisham Cross at precisely 10 o'clock that morning. He was sure. But when Poirot asked if he remembered who handed him the letter, the boy hesitated. I think it were the vicar's housekeeper," he said finally. "She said it had been left there by a gentleman in a dark coat. Said he looked important." "Important," Poirot repeated, eyes narrowing. "And did this important man leave a name?" "No, sir. Only said the letter was urgent. Must go to Blackheath Manor today, before tea." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "it arrived after." The pieces were beginning to fall, not into place, not yet, but around, something central, something missing. Poirot returned to the study and reviewed the guest list again. Every person had been accounted for at tea, except for the one who never came. Lady Darnley's cousin, Mr. Rupert Gable, who had sent word that he'd been delayed in London. "But that was 2 days ago," Hastings said. "Surely he wouldn't turn up now." "No," Poirot replied. "But perhaps he never meant to arrive at all. Perhaps he came early, in secret." That night, Poirot did not dine. He walked the corridors of Blackheath Manor with steps so light they made no echo, observing the way the light from each candle fell across the wallpaper, how the scent of beeswax polish did not quite cover something faintly metallic in the drawing room, perhaps the scent of rust or blood. He paused before the grand piano. Someone had played it recently. The cover was still half raised, one string slightly out of tune. He opened it gently. Inside, behind the score for Claire de Lune, was another envelope, blank, unsealed. Inside, a small torn portion of a letter, clearly part of a longer message. The words read simply, "She knew it all. Eleanor never forgets." In the morning, Poirot summoned everyone to the conservatory. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting strange colors across the stone floor. "I must tell you all," he began, "that Miss Vale's death was not an act of passion. It was an act of prevention. And this note, this charming, tidy, little message, it was meant to mislead not us, but someone else." Mrs. Grange gasped. "But who else could it be for?" Poirot turned. "Colonel Venn, you recognize the handwriting, don't you?" The colonel stiffened. "No." "You do. You served with Rupert Gable in the war. You've seen his letters, and he is left-handed." The colonel's jaw clenched. "But why would he warn anyone?" Celeste asked. "Because he didn't," Poirot replied. "He wrote that note 2 days ago. Before Eleanor died, it was never meant to prevent her death. It was meant to confirm it. Rupert knew she would die, because he was blackmailing her." He turned to the group. "The torn letter I found, she was being threatened. Rupert had learned that she was not simply Edgar Darnley's ward, but his daughter. That knowledge would have jeopardized the inheritance. Lady Darnley stood to lose everything." "Then it was her?" Hastings asked. "She killed her?" Poirot shook his head. "No, not this time. She was willing, but she was not first. The poison was subtle, the timing exact. It was not an act of rage, it was calculation. Cold, cruel calculation." He turned at last to Mrs. Grange. "You handled the tea, you set the tray, you placed the cups, and only one cup was touched by gloves." Mrs. Grange did not speak. Her fingers curled around the crucifix. "Eleanor confronted you," Poirot said. "She knew what Rupert had done, but she also knew who had delivered the poison. She tasted it, accidentally. A sip, perhaps. Not enough to kill, but enough to warn her. That's why she poured the second cup, and didn't drink it. She meant to switch them, but she was too late." "I loved him," Mrs. Grange whispered. "Rupert, since we were young, he said she was going to ruin him, said he just needed her frightened. That's all. I didn't mean—" "You did not scream," Poirot said coldly. "You silenced." Later, when the constable took her away, the silence returned to Blackheath. The manor no longer whispered. It mourned. Poirot stood alone in the study, watching the fire flicker low. Hastings entered quietly, a glass of sherry in hand. "And that note, Poirot," he said. "In the end, it told us everything and nothing at all." Poirot smiled sadly. "Oui, mon ami, because in a case like this, it is not the message that matters. It is who receives it and when." He turned back to the fire. "Truth, like poison," he murmured, "has no effect unless swallowed." Chapter 4. Footprints where none should be. The scream came not from fear this time, but from discovery. A sharp, breathless cry that shattered the hush of early morning like a knife on porcelain. It came from the study, locked since last night, and it brought the house running. Poirot arrived precisely 6 seconds after the scream, calm, as always, but quicker than expected. The door, oak and ancient, was still sealed from the inside, and yet the maid, Alice, stood frozen just beyond it, her face drained of all color. She pointed at the glass. inset in the door, wide-eyed. "I saw them," she whispered. "I swear I saw them. Footprints, just now. They weren't there last night." Hastings frowned, reaching for the handle. "But it's locked." Poirot stepped forward. "Let us confirm first, mon ami, what precisely she saw, and what she did not." When they forced the door, a draught of stale tobacco and dust emerged. The study was silent. Books upright, the fireplace cold, desk untouched. But across the rug, they were there. Footprints, damp, distinct, and trailing a path from the far window to the desk. Poirot's brow arched, and for once even he appeared caught off guard. The window, latched from the inside, no broken panes, no moved curtain rods, and the door, still bolted until the very moment they opened it. "Impossible," Hastings breathed. "They lead in, but not out." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "We are presented with the rarest of puzzles. Not who, but how." The footprints themselves were curious, neither heavy nor erratic. Narrow, deliberate, the sole of a riding boot perhaps, but smaller than expected. Poirot knelt to inspect one closely. The edge had a faint line, a hairline crack along the heel. "Custom," he muttered. "Handmade, expensive, but recently cracked." The room was swept, measured, and examined. Nothing stolen. No drawer moved. No object shifted, even a fraction. And yet something had been. Here, something, or someone, had entered a sealed room, left wet footprints behind, and vanished without a trace. By noon, the suspects had been gathered. Colonel Venn, who had spent the night playing cards with the estate manager in the smoking room, he insisted, of course, that he had not moved since. His boots were clean, but he bristled at the suggestion that he even owned riding boots anymore. Celeste, ever ethereal and slippery, claimed she had been sketching the garden from the upper floor, unaware of the disturbance, until Alice screamed. Her shoes, oddly enough, were absent from her room when Poirot asked to see them. She claimed the maid had taken them for polishing. The maid said she hadn't, and Mrs. Grange, face drawn tighter than a bowstring, simply said, "No one goes in that study. Not since Mr. Darnley passed. Not even me." And yet, Poirot said quietly, someone did. It was a locked-room mystery in its purest form. Classic, infuriating, elegant. Poirot could see the framework forming already, like frost blooming slowly over a window pane. The footprints were not a mistake. They were a message. That evening, Poirot returned alone to the study. He relocked the door behind him and sat at the desk. The room smelled of pipe smoke, leather, and something faintly sweet, almost like cloves. Not new, not out of place, but suddenly significant. He opened the drawer where Darnley kept his ledgers. Beneath a stack of handwritten pages, financials and receipts, was a small envelope sealed with red wax, no initials. Inside, a letter addressed to the one who knows. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Eleanor Vale. I saw you," it read. "I saw what you took from him before the will was signed. You are no better than the rest, and when I speak, I will name you. Unless, of course, you return what is not yours." Dated 3 days before her death. Poirot stared at it for a long time, then leaned back and closed his eyes. "Ah," he murmured, "so it is not murder only that walks these halls. It is the ghost of inheritance. And ghosts, Hastings, do not always float. They sometimes wear boots." He called for Celeste first. "You say your shoes were sent to be cleaned," he said, "and yet they have not returned." "I don't know where they are," she said too quickly. Perhaps the wrong maid took them. Poirot tilted his head. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you ever ride with Mr. Darnley? On the grounds, perhaps? He was fond of horses, was he not? She blinked. He was, but I never rode with him. Odd, Poirot said, because I have seen a photograph, framed in the east corridor. You are seated beside him on a chestnut mare. She faltered. That was years ago. He smiled. Of course. Mrs. Grange was next. Madame, Poirot said gently, who else had a key to the study? No one, she replied. Not since Mr. Darnley died. And yet someone entered, Poirot said. So perhaps a copy was made? Her face changed, just slightly. Impossible. He nodded. Then only one answer remains. Someone was already inside the room when it was locked, and left only when it could be unlocked again, but not through doors or windows. Colonel Venn scoffed when he was brought in. You're chasing ghosts, Poirot. Footprints and fantasy. That room's been untouched for months. Indeed, Poirot said calmly. So imagine my surprise to find the scent of clove oil on the floorboards, a remedy often used by fencers or those who wear stiff, narrow boots. Venn's eye twitched. I did not say riding boots, Poirot continued, but they serve much the same purpose when crossing muddy ground. It was just after midnight when Poirot asked Hastings to meet him in the east hallway. He held up a small silver coin and dropped it to the ground. It rolled slightly, then began to tilt toward a crack in the floorboards. There, Poirot said softly, a hollow, beneath, the kind used for hidden wine storage, or passage. They pried it open, and there, beneath the floorboards, was a crawl space, narrow, just wide enough for a person. Mud lined the edge of the hatch, and one boot, not a pair, just one, Celeste's. She confessed at dawn, but not to the murder, not to theft, to fear. I didn't kill Eleanor, she said, tears streaking her face. But I found her letter. I knew what she was threatening. I thought if I scared whoever she was accusing, they'd confess. I made the footprints. I used the passage. I wore an old pair of boots Edgar gave me years ago. I thought maybe whoever she meant would come forward before someone else died. Poirot listened in silence, then asked, And what of the missing will? She froze. I don't know anything about that. But Poirot already knew. The letter Eleanor wrote? The one threatening to expose the thief? It wasn't addressed to Venn or to Grange. It was addressed to herself. A copy of it, unsigned, was found in her sketchbook. As if she were testing how it might read. Eleanor was bluffing. She didn't know who the real thief was. She was provoking a response. And someone responded. That someone was still at large. Celeste was innocent. Of the murder at least. But the footprints? The footprints had been meant for Poirot. A cry for help. A trap. Or perhaps, as he often mused, a confession without words. When the sun rose over Blackheath, Poirot stood once more in the study, hands behind his back. They all left something behind, he said aloud, but the guilty always leave the most. He looked once more at the footprint. Human nature, Hastings, he said softly, as the first rays of daylight lit the trail. It never walks without consequence. Chapter 5. The widow didn't flinch. The wind carried the scent of burnt paper and something faintly floral, lilac, or perhaps lavender, as it swept through the corridor of Blackheath Manor, tugging at the heavy velvet curtains like a hand searching for secrets. In the drawing-room, a single candle guttered violently, though no one had touched it. The wick hissed, flickering with a nervous flame, and in that moment, Hastings stepped forward from the doorway, pale, shaken. "She's dead," he said, his voice low, breathless. "Lady Wexham, in the rose garden, murdered." Poirot turned, very slowly, his eyes already narrowing, not at the news, but at the silence that followed it. For Lady Darnley, seated in the high-backed armchair by the hearth, did not move. Her teacup remained delicately poised in her hand, her posture perfect. She did not gasp. She did not speak. She did not flinch. "Dead," she repeated, not as a question, but as if acknowledging the weather. "Well, that is unfortunate." Poirot observed her in stillness, allowing the silence to drag just long enough to make the air in the room feel heavy. Her fingers did not tighten on the handle. Her gaze did not search the corners for witnesses. She sipped once, carefully, and returned the cup to its saucer. "She was our guest," Poirot said softly. "She was a problem," Lady Darnley corrected. "A polite one, but persistent. Always asking questions about the estate, about Edgar, about the will. And now," Poirot said, his voice almost a whisper, "she has been removed." Lady Darnley looked up at him, finally. "Are you accusing me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Ah, non, madame. I am merely observing that you do not seem surprised, not even troubled. I have seen people receive news of a dead canary with more emotion." Her eyes sharpened. "I do not perform for strangers." "Nor, it would appear, for the dead," he replied. Lady Wexham had been found sprawled across the gravel path in the rose garden, her mouth open, her eyes wide with what could only be described as betrayal. No blood, no weapon, but in her hand, a torn scrap of parchment, clutched so tightly it had crumpled into a near indecipherable twist. Poirot unfolded it with delicate fingers. 3 words. "Tell him now." No signature, no context, but the implication weighed heavily on the case, like a stone on glass. Hastings, always eager to anchor meaning to action, had already begun, theorizing aloud. Perhaps she was trying to reach someone, warn them. Maybe she was blackmailing someone, and they acted before she could tell. Whoever him is? Poirot did not answer. His gaze lingered on the parchment, then shifted to the sky. It had not rained, and yet her shoes were wet. A trail of water had marked her steps on the garden stones. But there was no fountain, no puddle. He filed it away without comment. The suspects, as ever, had gathered before anyone summoned. Them. Colonel Venn was the first to speak, his voice laced with frustration. "This place is cursed," he muttered. "I knew it. Since Edgar's death, it's been nothing but poison, whispers, and shadows. Now another woman's dead in the roses." Poirot looked at him. "You are fond of Lady Wexham?" Venn's mouth tightened. "She asked questions, important ones, about the estate, about what happened the night Edgar died. She didn't believe the stroke story either. But no, I wasn't. Fond of her, I respected her. There's a difference." "And did you speak with her this morning?" "No. I was riding." Poirot nodded. "You ride every morning." "Yes. And yet you left the stable door open today." "Why?" Venn hesitated. "It must have been the boy, the new stable hand." Poirot let the lie rest between them like a damp cloth. Celeste, on the other hand, had been in the east wing, sketching by the window, again. She claimed she saw Lady Wexham head toward the garden. After breakfast, she looked determined, Celeste said, like she meant to confront someone. Her coat wasn't even buttoned properly. Poirot's eyes glinted. "And you did not follow?" No, Celeste said. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Celeste said nothing, but she looked toward Lady Darnley. Mrs. Grange remained composed, though her voice trembled when she said she'd seen Lady Wexham in the library an hour before the murder. She was reading old letters. Something about handwriting. Letters, Poirot repeated, belonging to Edgar. I believe so, the housekeeper said. She seemed upset. The library, when Poirot visited it, smelled faintly of lilac. He knelt near the fireplace and retrieved a half-burned piece of paper wedged behind the iron grate. The ink was blurred, but one word was still legible. Confess. He stared at it a long while. The storm came later that afternoon. Thunder rolled across the hills like distant cannon fire, and the manor groaned beneath the weight of it. Poirot, undeterred by weather, gathered the suspects again, not to accuse, but to ask a question. Lady Wexham was not murdered for what she knew, he said softly. She was murdered for what she almost knew. Someone believed she had proof, and someone was willing to kill to stop her from finding it. He paused. And I believe she was one step away. He turned to Lady Darnley. She confronted you last night. Did she not? Lady Darnley said. Nothing. She told you she had seen a second will, one that gave everything, not to you, but to another. Still nothing. Poirot approached slowly, like a pianist approaching a single final key. And she told you she had found the handwriting expert, someone who could confirm Edgar's true signature. At last, Lady Darnley spoke. Her voice was steady. She was bluffing. There was no expert, no second will, just a bitter woman desperate for scandal. But you believed her bluff, Poirot said, because it was dangerously close to the truth. Colonel Venn exploded. Then she was killed to protect the inheritance. Poirot turned. No, Colonel, she was not. He walked to the window, drew back the curtain. She was killed because she was about to forgive someone. They stared. Poirot smiled faintly. The note, tell him now. That was not a threat. It was a message. To Lady Darnley. Lady Wexham knew the truth, but chose not to expose it. She was giving you a chance, a final one, to tell Edgar's son the truth. The child born in secret, the heir hidden away. Lady Darnley's face cracked, just slightly. You would have inherited nothing if she had spoken, but instead she gave you mercy. And how did you answer? Poirot produced a small glass vial, found in Lady Darnley's dressing-table drawer. Belladonna, a few drops on the gloves. She would touch her face, her eyes, her lips. The rest would follow. I never intended to kill her, Lady Darnley whispered. Poirot bowed his head. And yet, she lies in the roses. The constables came for her that evening. As they led her away, she looked at Poirot once, eyes bright, not with tears, but rage. You never saw me cry, she said coldly. Not once. Poirot nodded. That is why, he said. I knew you were guilty. Later, he sat in the empty drawing room, the storm having passed. Only the candle remained, flickering gently. Ah, Hastings, he murmured to the silence. When one loses love, the heart shatters. But when one fears losing power, the heart hardens. He reached for his tea. It had gone cold. Chapter 6. The glove in the piano bench. It was the sound that drew him. One key pressed, then silence. Not a melody, not a song. Just a single note in the quiet of a sleeping house, struck by no visible hand. Poirot had been walking the corridor outside the music room, following his nightly ritual of observation before rest, when the faint vibration reached him like a whispered confession. He paused. The door was ajar, and the fire within had long since died down. Shadows crowded the corners of the room, but the grand piano remained open, its lid lifted slightly, as if caught mid-performance. Poirot entered quietly, footsteps muted against the Persian rug. The room smelled faintly of lavender polish and waxed mahogany. As he neared the piano, something glinted just beneath the bench lid, a slight crease between the leather cushion and the wood. He raised it gently. Inside, folded as if forgotten in haste, was a single, elegant glove. Ivory satin, left hand, no embroidery, no monogram, but clearly expensive. Poirot lifted it delicately with his handkerchief, holding it beneath the lamplight. It was far too small for Lady Darnley, too refined for Celeste, not Eleanor's, not Wexham's. "Ah," he said softly, "a woman who wished to be remembered, but only by half." The mystery of the glove could have waited until morning, but Poirot's mind never permitted rest when the picture was incomplete. And in this moment, the puzzle shifted again, like a portrait once thought finished that revealed a hidden figure in the corner. He summoned Hastings at once. The captain, bleary-eyed and still adjusting his collar, muttered, "You found a glove, Poirot. At this hour? Oui, mon ami. But not just any glove. This glove. It is not hers. Whose? That is what we must find out." The suspects were not awakened. Not yet. Poirot believed in precision before confrontation. He began with Lady Darnley's wardrobe, accessed via Mrs. Grange, who, after her release, pending charges and lack of proof, had returned with sullen quietness to her duties. She denied any glove of that make or cut belonged to the household. Celeste denied ownership, but it was Colonel Venn who offered the first fracture in the story. Upon being asked if he recognized it, his reaction was uncharacteristically stiff. His gaze lingered a beat too long. "I can't say that I do," he said. "It's not something I'd notice. Women's things aren't my area." "Ah," Poirot replied, "but this is not a woman's thing exactly. This glove, it is the same brand favored by fencing champions." That got his attention. "You're saying it's not decorative?" Venn asked too quickly. "I am saying it is worn by someone who prefers precision over display," Poirot said calmly. "Someone like Lady Wexham." "But she's dead," Hastings said. "Precisely," Poirot replied. "And so we must ask, why would a dead woman's glove appear 3 days after her death, in a piano bench she never touched? The clue, unlike the glove, did not fit. It had been planted. But by whom and why?" Later that morning, the piano tuner arrived, a routine service ordered long before the chaos began. An elderly man with poor eyesight and impeccable ears, he tuned with fingers as gentle as rain. Poirot asked if he'd noticed the glove. "I saw it last week," he said simply. "Didn't think anything of it. Some lady's mistake, I supposed." "Last week?" Poirot echoed. "Before Lady Wexham was killed?" "Yes, sir. Same glove. I remember because it had a tiny tear near the base of the thumb. Looked recent." Poirot examined the glove again. There it was, the tear. A hairline slit, almost invisible, which meant it had been there before the murder, and someone had returned to plant it again after her death. The suspects were gathered by evening. The storm outside was thick and fast, slamming rain against the tall windows like fists. Thunder rumbled over the hills. Poirot stood in front of the fire, the glove laid neatly on the table behind him. "This glove," he began, "was found in the piano bench." At first, it seemed meaningless, a trivial object, but nothing in a house of murder is trivial, especially when it reappears after the woman to whom it likely belonged has died. He turned to Venn. "Colonel, you knew Lady Wexham for how long?" 7 years, he replied. "And were you ever close?" "She was difficult," he said. "Brilliant, but difficult." "Did you ever quarrel?" "We disagreed on money," he said, after a pause. "She believed Edgar was hiding funds from the trust." "And was he?" Venn did not answer. Poirot turned next to Celeste. "Mademoiselle, you told me you never saw this glove before." "I haven't. And yet the maid recalls seeing you wear gloves, not unlike this, during last year's spring ball." She looked away. "That was a different pair." "Perhaps, but not if one was missing." She swallowed. "What are you implying?" "That you were in the music room before the murder, and that you, perhaps without knowing, handled the glove, or placed it." "I didn't." Poirot raised his hand. "I believe you, but someone wanted us to think otherwise. Someone knew the glove existed, and where it had been, and when to use it as a misdirection." He turned slowly. "That person is Rupert Gable." A silence thicker than the storm outside filled the room. Rupert Gable, the elusive cousin, long absent, long silent. He had written once, early on, about being delayed in London, but no one had seen him since. No telegrams, no voice, only stories, until Poirot opened the door, and there he was, drenched, gaunt, exhausted, but very much real. "Good evening," Poirot said, as if he'd been expected all along. Rupert entered, gaze flicking to the glove. "It was hers," he said quietly. "Wexham's. I gave them to her. A matched pair. She left one behind after we argued." Poirot nodded. "Why did you not come forward?" "Because she threatened to expose everything. She knew Edgar's death wasn't natural. She found the second will. She knew Lady Darnley had it destroyed, and she knew I helped." Hastings looked stunned. "Then why would you plant the glove?" Rupert looked up, eyes shining. "Because I thought if it was found, someone might think she had returned, that it was her accusing us, not you." Poirot stepped forward. "But that glove, it is not an accusation. It is a keepsake, a memory you tried to turn into guilt, and now it tells a different story." Rupert turned away, shaking. "I didn't kill her." "I know," Poirot said, "but you led to it, as did others. And that is the tragedy of murder, mon ami. It is rarely the act of one hand alone. Often it is many silences stacked together, until someone breaks." The glove remained on the table as the constables came. Later, when the fire had burned low and the storm had passed, Hastings asked Poirot why he hadn't thrown the glove into the fire. "Because," Poirot said, "some things are not for destruction. They are for remembrance. A symbol, yes, of guilt, but also of grace lost too late." He looked at the piano, at the single key, still pressed down, ever so slightly, by an unseen weight. "Human nature, Hastings," he whispered. "It never strikes a single note. It plays a whole song." Chapter 7. She said the wrong name. The candlelight trembled, as if the house had breathed in. Poirot noticed it, not the flame itself, but the way its shadow leaned suddenly across the polished drawing-room floor, like a hand reaching for something just out of frame. That was when Celeste spoke. The others had fallen into silence, waiting for her answer to Poirot's measured question. A simple thing. Where were you at 11:30 the night Lady Wexham died? And Celeste, still, standing near the piano, eyes wide and rimmed in sleep, said, "I told Edgar I was—" She stopped. The name hung there, suspended. Poirot did not flinch. He did not breathe. Nor did he look to Hastings, who shifted in his seat as if the name had pulled the floor from under him. Edgar. But Edgar Darnley had been dead for months. Lady Wexham had died only days ago. And yet Celeste had just told them she had spoken to him that night. "Pardon, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "Would you repeat that?" She stared at him, visibly unraveling. I meant Venn. Colonel Venn. I was with him. That's what I meant." "But that is not what you said." Poirot's voice was calm. "You said Edgar. And now we must ask ourselves why that name, so carefully buried in silence, has returned to your lips tonight." Outside, the wind scraped softly at the shutters like someone trying not to be heard. Inside, the room held its breath. Poirot's gaze moved from Celeste to the others. Venn's expression was unreadable. Rupert looked puzzled. Mrs. Grange, hovering by the door, held her tray of tea just a little too tightly, and Lady Darnley, sitting straight-backed near the hearth, did not look at Celeste at all. Poirot stepped forward, one slow, deliberate pace. "We have heard your story before, mademoiselle, that you were on the upper floor, sketching, on the night Lady Wexham died, that you were afraid to go outside, that you saw nothing, heard nothing. But if Edgar is the name your tongue reached for in distress, then it is Edgar who remains on your conscience." Celeste's lips trembled. "It was just a mistake, a name I said too often before. I used to see him in the halls, in the gardens. It's habit." "Non," Poirot replied softly. "It is memory. And memory, when shocked, reverts not to lies, but to truths too dangerous to speak aloud." He turned to Hastings. "Do you recall what Eleanor said to you once? That she had seen someone return to Edgar's study after midnight, someone who left the door unlocked." "She never said who it was," Hastings replied. "No," Poirot agreed. "But she said it was someone who should not have had a key, someone who did not belong in that room, yet walked through it like they owned it. A ghost, but not of the dead." Poirot circled the group slowly. "And now we have a glove, found in a piano bench, footprints inside a locked study, a teacup left untouched, a note that arrived too late, and now, the slip of a name." He stopped before Celeste. "You knew Edgar was dead, but you did not mourn, because you knew, perhaps more than anyone, that he was not the man he pretended to be." Celeste's knees buckled slightly. She sat, hard on the piano bench, as though the truth had weight. She began. "He was cruel. You didn't know him like we did. He kept secrets. He kept people on strings." Poirot nodded. "And one of those strings led to you." "Yes," she whispered. "And when I pulled it," he snapped. The room fell into silence. Poirot waited a moment, then walked to the fireplace. He took from the mantel a folded envelope, a letter he had found earlier that day, tucked behind a loose board in the drawing-room wall, likely hidden in haste. He unfolded it. "This letter," he said, "was addressed to Rupert Gable. It is unsigned, but the language, it is yours, mademoiselle. The syntax, the shape of the words. You wrote this." He held it aloft. "You warned Rupert that if Edgar's secret will was destroyed, there would be consequences, that Lady Wexham had copies, that if she were silenced, the original would mean nothing. You told him, one more lie, and I'll resurrect the truth myself. He paused. A curious phrase. One might almost think you meant it literally. Celeste buried her face in her hands. I didn't kill her, she said. I swear to you, but I knew she was close. Too close. I wanted Rupert to panic. I thought maybe, if he feared exposure, he'd confess to Poirot before it was too late. And instead, Poirot said softly, he waited. There was a beat. Someone else got to her first. He turned then, and his gaze fell upon Lady Darnley. Shall we speak of names, madame? Lady Darnley raised her eyebrows slightly. What of them? Eleanor Vale, Poirot said. Celeste Rain, Lady Wexham. All women who at some point called you by a name you no longer claimed, a name from before you were Darnley, when you were still Eleanor Armitage. A flicker then, barely visible, but Poirot saw it. You knew Edgar long before your marriage, Poirot said. You met him at the conservatory, long before he inherited the estate. You took the name Darnley, but before that, you had another. He turned to Rupert. You once asked who Eleanor Vale really was. But perhaps the better question was, who was Lady Darnley before the wedding? Rupert blinked. Poirot stepped closer. She was your mother's sister, your aunt, and when your mother died, she swore to raise you. But Edgar Darnley refused. He hated you. And Lady Darnley, your aunt, married him not for love, but to protect you. Lady Darnley's jaw trembled. I wanted the will destroyed, she said. Yes. I wanted Eleanor silenced. She wasn't just close, she knew. She knew everything. That Edgar kept two wills. That one named me, that the other named no one, and I couldn't take the chance. And so, Poirot said, you gave the order. There was a pause. I didn't kill her myself. Poirot nodded. But you didn't stop it either. The room held its breath. Poirot walked to the window, watching the wind pull violently at the trees. Human nature, Hastings, he said softly, does not always lie with the lips. Sometimes it stumbles in the mouth and says the one name it should never say aloud. Behind him, Celeste wept. Outside, the storm raged on. Chapter 8. The Candle That Burned. Twice. The candle was the only light in the room when the scream echoed through Blackheath. Not a human scream this time, but the metallic screech of something falling, something heavy and deliberate. Poirot turned from the corridor at once, his shoes whispering against the Turkish runner, his mind already ahead of the noise. The house was supposed to be asleep, yet someone had relit the east drawing-room fireplace, and one of the candelabras had been knocked over. He found Hastings already inside, crouching by the hearth, frowning. The fire had burned too high, too quickly, and next to the scattered logs on the floor, one of the 5 candles remained oddly short. The others stood proud and nearly full, but this one, only halfway down, its wax pooled into the base like a clock that had run too fast. Strange, Hastings muttered. These candles were all new this morning. Poirot said nothing at first. He moved instead toward the fallen candelabrum. Not just knocked, he saw now, but placed. As if someone had tilted it just enough to fall when the wax reached its lowest wick. A timer. A message. He bent, lifting the short candle carefully, inspecting the edge. It has been burned once already, he murmured, then snuffed and relit. A reused candle? Hastings asked. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Non, mon ami. A reused lie. He rose, dusting his gloves, and scanned the room. It was just as it had been, hours before, formal, silent, preserved in that uneasy balance between aristocracy and decay. But something had changed. Not just the candle, the angle of the fire irons, the ash on the rug. Someone had been here, waiting, or leaving a trace. And then Poirot saw it. The faintest smudge on the wainscoting near the corner desk. A gloved hand, perhaps, leaning for balance. And beneath it, wax, not spilled, but pressed, as if melted deliberately onto the wood. He stepped back and surveyed the entire room like it was a stage. Whoever was here returned not to act, he whispered to himself, but to rehearse. The house was roused once more. Mrs. Grange entered first, still tying her dressing gown, her face pale but unsurprised. Celeste came second, rubbing her arms against the chill, eyes wide and startled. But Poirot saw how quickly they moved to the candle. And Colonel Venn, of course, arrived last. Dry boots, clean coat, but his left cuff was dusted in ash. Poirot moved toward the hearth. This candle, he began, was lit once today. We know this. It stood with its 4 brothers when Lady Darnley hosted tea. At that time, all 5 were identical, new. But now this one, half the height, half the time. What does that tell us? That someone relit it, Venn said flatly. We. Poirot nodded, and in so doing, left behind not just melted wax, but a timestamp. He turned. Whoever was here knew exactly when it would fall. They counted backwards from the moment of noise. They wanted us to believe this was accidental. It was not. This was choreography. Celeste looked shaken. Why? Why stage a candle to fall? To send a message, Poirot replied, or perhaps to obscure one. And then he moved to the piano. Again, he opened the bench. Inside, gone now, was the glove. But in its place, a folded page, burnt around the edges, smelling faintly of wax and rose oil. Poirot opened it slowly. A list of names, handwritten, Edgar Darnley at the top, Rupert Gable second, Celeste third, no title, no explanation, just one word, scrawled across the bottom, witnesses. He showed it to the group, in silence. Celeste stared at her name, lips trembling. That wasn't there earlier. That wasn't mine. Of course not, Poirot said. It was left for you. Someone wanted you to find it, and someone burned the rest of the page, then tucked this piece in here, knowing the commotion would draw us back. Mrs. Grange said nothing, her hand tightening around the silver crucifix she wore. Poirot moved toward the fire. This was meant to frighten, he said, but fear is often loud when guilt is silent. He looked up. And yet, there is another reason a candle might be burned twice. He returned to the wax spill near the wall. Pressed into it was a faint impression, circular, smooth. Poirot touched it lightly. A seal, he murmured. A ring pressed, into wax perhaps? Not a letter seal, but personal, family. And then he knew. Later that morning, Poirot stood in Edgar Darnley's study. Alone, the east window let in grey morning light, cutting across the desk where papers still sat untouched since his death. Poirot reached into the drawer, pulled out a tiny velvet pouch. Inside, a signet ring, family crest. The seal matched the impression in the wax. Rupert. Poirot summoned them one by one. Not to accuse, but to dislodge. The pieces still stuck in their lies. First, Celeste. Why was your name on the list? He asked. I don't know. You were not Edgar's daughter, nor his lover, but you were his ward. Did he confide in you? No, she said, then hesitated. Once, he said he feared someone close, someone whose loyalty had changed. Did he say who? She shook her head. Then think, mademoiselle, Poirot said softly. Who would benefit most from a death without inquiry? Mrs. Grange, when asked about the candle, denied everything, but Poirot saw the way her eyes flicked to the rug each time he mentioned the wax. Her shoes, he noted, had no trace of it. She had not been in the room. She had prepared it. It was Venn who broke the silence. He cornered Poirot near the stables at noon, his expression thunderous. She knew, he hissed. Lady Wexham. She had the copy of the second will, the one that left everything to Rupert. Poirot nodded. And yet you helped Edgar write the first. Because I thought I'd be named, Venn muttered. He promised, but he lied. And so you lied in return, Poirot said, but more efficiently. Poirot gathered them all in the east room by twilight. The candle had been replaced. The fire burned low again. He placed the wax mold on the table. This, he said, was not an accident. Rupert, your ring made this mark. Rupert looked stunned. I haven't worn that ring in weeks. Poirot nodded. Because you gave it to her. He turned to Celeste. No, not you. To Eleanor. Gasps. She wore it in secret. A token. Because she believed him. Because she thought foolishly that he would name her. Not as heir, but as wife. Rupert paled. I never. She was delusional. Poirot raised a hand. She believed in your promise. That's why she kept the second will. To protect you, and that's why you killed her. Rupert stammered, but Poirot continued. You used the candle as a timer. You planted the note. You used fear to create a false narrative, one of mystery, one of accident. But what you left behind was time. Time burned too fast, too neat, too precise. Rupert collapsed into the chair. She was going to ruin me. She had letters. She would have destroyed everything. You destroyed her first, Poirot said coldly. The constables came, and as they led Rupert away, Poirot looked once more at the candle. Twice it burned, he said, but once was enough to betray. He turned to Hastings as the room emptied. You see, my friend, even time leaves fingerprints. Chapter 9. The alibi was borrowed. The grandfather clock struck midnight as the east hallway groaned beneath the weight of footsteps that never reached the room. Poirot's candle barely held its flame against the sudden gust that crept beneath the doors of Blackheath, like a whisper returning to the scene of a crime. Something was off. Not dramatically, not violently, but subtly. Poirot paused at the top of the stairs, his head tilting slightly as he listened. Not for sound, but for silence. The kind of silence that followed too closely behind a lie. It was not the storm, nor the footsteps, nor the lateness of the hour that disturbed him. It was something Hastings had said earlier that evening, offhandedly over chess. A detail he had passed over. Until now, Poirot had asked who had last seen Mrs. Grange before the murder of Lady Wexham. Hastings had answered simply, she was with me. She brought my tea at 10 o'clock sharp. And Poirot, without thinking, had nodded. But now, at midnight, he realized Hastings does not drink tea after sunset. He's said so 100 times. He returned at once to the study, where the crime scene had long since been cleared, but the shadows lingered like spectators waiting for a second act. He lit the lamp on Edgar Darnley's old desk and opened the household ledger Mrs. Grange maintained with meticulous pride. There it was, an entry from that night, 10 p.m. Tea delivered to Captain Hastings, conservatory, and beneath it, in different handwriting, 11:15 p.m. Laundry folded. Poirot's brow furrowed. The second entry was too exact, too conscious, and that was when he saw it. A smear, barely visible beneath the curling loop of the L in laundry. Lipstick, a faint smudge of deep plum. Not Mrs. Grange's color, Celeste's. Poirot closed the book softly and leaned back. Ah, now we begin to see it. The next morning, as the house emerged from sleep into grey, overcast daylight, Poirot requested each guest revisit their whereabouts on the night of Lady Wexham's death. Not because he needed their answers, but because he needed to watch them answer. Colonel Venn, arms folded, recited his claim with military precision. He had been in the library with Lady Darnley from 10 till midnight. Lady Darnley confirmed it with a flat voice and eyes that did not meet Poirot's. Celeste said she had been asleep in her quarters. But when asked if anyone could confirm that, she simply smiled and said, "No one checks on me at night, Monsieur Poirot." And Mrs. Grange? "I brought the captain his tea at 10. Then I was in the laundry." "Alone?" Poirot asked. "Yes," she replied, "as always." Later, in private, Poirot asked Hastings again about the tea. This time, Hastings frowned. "You know I never drink tea that late," he said. "I didn't even hear a knock. The tray was just sitting there when I returned from the washroom." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the cup, was it warm?" "No," Hastings said slowly. "Now that you mention it, it wasn't. Someone had brought the tray early, or someone else had brought it altogether, which meant the alibi was not hers." He returned to the laundry room just before luncheon. The room was quiet, lined with ironed linen, freshly folded, the scent of lavender and starch sharp in the air. Poirot examined the ledger again, this time tilting the page against the light. Under the L in laundry, a second hand had begun a word before being crossed out. Then a hard slash. Celeste. She had begun to sign for someone else, then caught herself. That evening, Poirot stood before the household once more, the east drawing-room lit with firelight that played against the stone like restless ghosts. He held the ledger up, a single white glove in the other hand. "This book," he said, "was meant to prove routine. But routine, like alibis, can be borrowed, or, worse, bought." He turned to Mrs. Grange. "You did not deliver the tea that night, and you were not folding laundry. The lipstick in the ledger reveals you loaned your name to someone else, and I believe it was not the first time." Mrs. Grange went pale. I only wanted to help." "Help whom?" Poirot asked. The room fell silent. Celeste stepped forward. "Me?" Poirot waited. "I was in the study," she said. "That night, I had found one of Edgar's keys long ago. I wanted to read what he'd written about me. I needed to know if I was just another decoration in this house." "And what did you find?" Poirot asked. "Nothing," she said. "He had already burned it." "So why borrow the alibi?" Hastings asked. "Because I knew someone had seen me leave," she said. "From the garden. I thought if I told the truth, I'd be blamed. I asked Mrs. Grange to say I was asleep." Poirot nodded slowly, and she agreed. "I owed her," Mrs. Grange said. "She kept my secret. Once, I thought it was only fair. But someone else used that lie too," Poirot said. He turned then to Colonel Venn. "You claim to be in the library with Lady Darnley, but Lady Darnley suffers from migraines. That night, She took laudanum at 9:45. She remembers nothing from the rest of the evening. She only confirmed your alibi because you told her she had. Then stiffened. Lady Wexham had cornered you, Poirot continued. She accused you of destroying the second will. She said she would go public. You panicked. Ven's fists tightened. I didn't kill her. No, Poirot said, but you covered for someone who did. Silence again. Who? Celeste whispered. Poirot closed his eyes. Rupert. No, Ven said quickly. He's in custody. Poirot opened his eyes. Yes. For another murder. But Lady Wexham died earlier, and Rupert's prints were not on the glove found at the scene. Yours were. Ven looked down. I found her, already dead. He said, I moved the body, tried to hide what Rupert had done. I didn't kill her. But you lent him your alibi. Because I owed him, Ven muttered. He saved my life once. I thought I was returning the favor. Poirot looked around the room. In the end, he said, everyone in this house has borrowed something. A name, a love, an alibi. But what they forget, always, is that borrowed time must be repaid. He turned to the fire, letting the glow warm the edge of the truth. Human nature, Hastings, he said quietly, does not always lie with malice. Sometimes it lies with loyalty. Chapter 10. Her tears were memorized. The crying was delicate, too delicate. Poirot stood just beyond the drawing-room threshold, watching the flicker of firelight ripple against the edge of the armchair where Celeste sat with her back to him. Each sob seemed placed. Perfect, each pause between them. Symmetrical, deliberate. A handkerchief twisted in her fingers, a soft gasp for air, a trembling exhale, all orchestrated like a pianist returning to a familiar piece. And Poirot, who had once said that human grief was the most untidy of emotions, found himself frozen not by sympathy, but by suspicion. He remembered it because he had heard it before. Not just the sobbing, but the structure of it. 3 soft gasps, 1 pause, a whisper, then a slow, breathy inhale, a performance memorized, not felt. And for Hercule Poirot, nothing betrayed the truth quite so completely as the rhythm of a lie. He waited until the final sniffle before stepping in. The creak of the floorboard deliberately light, but unmistakable. Celeste looked up with wet lashes and a quiver in her chin. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice fractured at the edges. You startled me. He bowed. Pardon, mademoiselle, but I could not help overhearing your grief, rehearsed with such precision. Her face stiffened for the briefest second. I don't know what you mean, she said. Non? Poirot moved closer. You cried just now exactly as you did the night Lady Wexham's body was found. 3 sobs, 1 gasp, and then, ah yes, your signature whisper. She didn't deserve this. The same words, in the same order. Celeste's eyes narrowed. So I'm not allowed to grieve consistently. You are allowed to feel what is true, Poirot said softly. But when pain is choreographed, it ceases to be pain. It becomes performance. She rose from the chair, wiping her eyes with too much elegance for someone who claimed to be unraveled. I've told you everything, she said. On the contrary, mademoiselle, Poirot replied, you have told me only what you memorized. He left her with that. Later that evening, Poirot gathered his notes in Edgar Darnley's study, the fire cracking low behind him. He sat beneath the portrait of the late patriarch, his face stern and heavy with judgment, and reviewed once more the interviews he'd conducted over the past 10 days. The pattern had been subtle, but it was there. Each suspect who spoke of Lady Wexham's final moments recounted the same phrases, the same dramatics, as though they had learned how to mourn her, not experienced it, except for one. Mrs. Grange. Her voice, when speaking of Lady Wexham's death, had faltered in places it should not have. Not from guilt, but from dissonance. She had described her as frightened, when others called her defiant. She said Wexham had dropped her gloves, but according to Rupert, she hadn't worn any that day. Small cracks, easily dismissed. But Poirot did not dismiss cracks. He lived in them. He asked to speak with Mrs. Grange the next morning. She came promptly, her hands folded, her apron pressed. "I wish to ask you about the moment you found Lady Wexham," he said. "I already told you. She was on the path, in the roses." "Yes, but you said she was wearing her green scarf." Mrs. Grange nodded. "She always wore it in the mornings." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "it was found in her room." She blinked. Poirot continued, "And you said she was holding her parasol, but that parasol had been broken a week prior. Celeste mentioned it." Mrs. Grange swallowed. "I must have been mistaken." "Non, madame, you were not mistaken. You were not there." There was silence. "You were given a scene," Poirot said, "told to repeat it, perhaps even rehearsed it, but the details are where truth falters." Mrs. Grange sat down slowly. "She didn't want anyone to see her die afraid," she whispered. "She made me promise, if it ever happened, that I would say she was composed, elegant, in control." Poirot tilted his head. "And why would she ask that of you?" Mrs. Grange met his gaze. "Because she knew they would come for her, and she didn't want them to have her fear." Poirot folded his hands. "Who, madame?" Mrs. Grange hesitated. "Not Rupert. He was a coward. But Venn, he was precise, cold, and Lady Darnley, she hated her. Ever since Edgar left the second will unsigned Poirot's mind spun. Later that day, he requested that all members of the house revisit their statements regarding Lady Wexham's final day. He listened as each repeated what they had already said, almost word for word. "She said she would fight it," said Celeste. "She walked toward the garden like she was marching to war," said Venn. "She left her room at 9:45 precisely," said Lady Darnley. But Poirot remembered. He remembered Celeste had said Wexham was peaceful when last seen. He remembered Venn had claimed to be riding at that time. He remembered Lady Darnley had taken laudanum at 9:30. And yet here they were, reciting a script. He stood before the fireplace and turned. "All of you," he said, "have told the same story. In different words, yes, but the same rhythm, the same pauses, the same adjectives, almost as if you rehearsed it together." There was silence. "And there is only one person who could have written it." He turned to the only one still seated. Celeste. She did not deny it. "I thought, if we unified our stories, it would protect us," she whispered. "I thought I could rewrite her ending, that if her death was beautiful, it wouldn't feel like failure." Poirot's voice was quiet. "It was not your place to curate grief, mademoiselle. It was your place to tell the truth." She wept then, but not like before. No rhythm, no choreography, real. Poirot watched her a long time. "She knew," he said, "someone would betray her. She did not want to die with fear in her eyes. But you see, mademoiselle, that is not what makes us human. It is not the courage, it is the fear we wear anyway." He turned away, leaving her to her sobs. "To edit the tears," he murmured to Hastings later that night, is to erase the soul. Chapter 11. The Door That Wasn't Locked. The wind howled against the east wing like something half-human, clawing and keening, as the moon pressed its pale light against the stained glass of Blackheath Manor. Somewhere in the dark, a hinge creaked. Poirot heard it. A metallic groan, too soft to wake the others, but far too deliberate to be ignored. He did not sleep through storms, nor through lies that crept on quiet souls. He stood at once, coat over his shoulders, shoes pressed, silently against the wooden floor, and followed the sound. He did not need to guess which door it had been. For the last 3 nights, he had marked it in his mind. The servants' corridor behind the study, the one Mrs. Grange insisted had been sealed since the renovations last spring. No one used it anymore, she'd claimed, and yet the first clue had not been noise, but absence. A patch of dust on the threshold, swept clean only in the shape of a shoe. One shoe, one path. Poirot moved without lantern. He knew the corridor well enough now, the soft rise in the 3rd step, the grooved panel near the left wall. As he reached the door, he slowed. His fingers brushed the handle. It was not cold. It was not locked. It never had been. He opened it. No protest from the hinges, no resistance from a latch, just the soft whoosh of undisturbed air rushing inward as if the house had been holding its breath. Poirot stepped through. The corridor on the other side was narrow, choked with dust and quiet. The floorboards here were warped, but the prints were recent. Boot treads, small, shallow. He followed them to a half-flight stairwell that led curiously, not down to the cellar, but up toward the rear of the old nursery rooms. Rooms no one used. Rooms Lady Darnley had locked for her nerves. At the top of the stairs, Poirot paused. A second set of prints veered off toward a door with peeling green paint. It had not been opened in years, yet the handle bore the fresh polish of recent use. He pressed against it. It gave easily. Inside was a room nearly empty, save for an old trunk and a makeshift cot with an indentation in the thin mattress. Someone had been sleeping here, alone, and in secret. He bent toward the trunk. It was unlocked. Inside, a stack of letters tied with ribbon. On top, a photo. A young woman, Eleanor. But beneath that, another, a child. Poirot froze. The child looked like Edgar Darnley, but the date in the corner said 1915. Too early. Far too early. And then he saw it, tucked in the folds of the ribbon, a locket. Inside, 2 names, Helena Armitage and Richard Wexham. Not Edgar, not Darnley, not even close. Poirot stood slowly. So this was not a room of mourning. It was a room of erasure. By dawn, the manor had stirred to life. Tea was being prepared. Footsteps returned to their morning routines, but Poirot did not wait. He summoned Hastings, Venn, Lady Darnley, Celeste, and Mrs. Grange to the conservatory at once. When they arrived, each was greeted by the same image, the photograph of the child, laid out beside the locket, and the servant's door key beside it. This, Poirot began, is the truth no one wished to see. This is the identity that walked through a door we believed to be locked, but lies, mes amis, have their own keys. He looked directly at Lady Darnley. You knew about the room, he said. You lied when you said it was sealed. In fact, you ordered it sealed only recently, after someone else discovered it. She said nothing. Poirot turned to Venn. And you, mon colonel, claimed to be in your room on the night Lady Wexham died. But you were seen near the back staircase by the stable hand. You claimed he was mistaken. I didn't go near that wing, Ven said, voice low. No, Poirot agreed, but someone wearing your boots did. He laid the boots on the table. Found, beneath Ven's bed, still damp, still stained. Rupert borrowed your alibi, Poirot continued, but someone borrowed your boots. Someone smaller, lighter, someone who could move quietly, and did. Celeste looked up slowly. It wasn't me. No, Poirot said. It was the child. Gasps. Not a child in age, but in name. The woman in the photo. Eleanor Vale's mother, the real heiress. Hidden, forgotten. She had a daughter, and that daughter was raised among you. Stepped closer. That daughter is you, Celeste. She shook her head. No, yes, Poirot said. You wore the glove. You entered the study. You found the letters. You confronted Rupert, but you did not kill. You only wanted what was yours. Tears welled in her eyes. Real this time. I didn't know, she whispered. I only knew I didn't belong. That I was never told the whole story. Poirot nodded. And someone feared what you would find. That is why the door was left, unlocked, not by mistake, but as a test, to see if you would follow. He turned then slowly to Mrs. Grange. You were the last to serve the tea that night. You were the one who found the letters before Celeste. You knew who she was. You recognized the locket. You had seen her mother wear it years ago. You chose to keep the truth hidden, until the will was found, until Lady Wexham learned the bloodline. Then, too late, you understood what had to be done. Mrs. Grange sat, heavily. I thought it was just a mistake, she whispered. I thought, if I said nothing, it would go away. But she started asking. She started remembering. And when she entered the study, Poirot said, you followed her. I only wanted to scare her. I didn't mean. Poirot held up his hand. No one ever means, but someone always does. The silence that followed was final. Later, in the drawing room, as the rain tapped gently against the window panes and the servants went about, their cleaning, Poirot stood alone. He looked to Hastings. Doors, mon ami, he said softly, do not lie. It is the people who walk through them that do. Chapter 12. The smile before the fall. The scream never came. That more than anything was what disturbed Poirot. The house held its breath as dawn broke, casting thin orange light through frost-laced windows and across the pale, silent corridors of Blackheath Manor. The morning was too quiet. Not the peace of a resolution, but the silence of something unresolved. One final note that had not yet been played. Poirot stood in the drawing room, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the photograph that had hung above the mantel for decades. Edgar Darnley, seated with unnatural stiffness, surrounded by shadows, masquerading as family. It had been repainted once, in oils, and retouched again. But Poirot saw what others did not. The one thing that had never changed in the portrait, the smile. Not Edgar's, but hers. Lady Darnley. Third from the left, just behind his shoulder. Tilted slightly, half hidden in the frame. A smile not of joy, nor even contentment, but something else. Calculation. Anticipation. It was the only smile in the portrait. Poirot turned slowly as Hastings entered with news that would unravel what remained. Celeste's gone, he said grimly, vanished from her room. The window latch was forced. Poirot gave the faintest nod. Of course she has. You think she ran? No, Poirot said softly. She was pushed. The house gathered quickly after that. Mrs. Grange was the first to arrive, hollow-eyed and unsteady. Colonel Venn followed, his jaw locked, coat thrown over a wrinkled shirt. Lady Darnley came last, perfectly dressed, no makeup, no tears. Poirot did not ask them to sit. He let the tension stand with them. "We have come," he said quietly, "to the final act. All the pieces are now in place, all except the one no one wished to look at directly. The one thing that ties each murder, each lie, each betrayal together." He held up the last piece of evidence, a handkerchief, folded, monogrammed, stained with a single drop of dried blood, found in the attic behind the piano bench, a match to the thread that bound the old locket, a locket that had been hidden, then stolen. "Last night," Poirot said, "Celeste confronted someone, not to accuse, but to ask for the truth. She had uncovered enough. She knew she was the daughter of Helena Armitage. She knew Edgar Darnley had rewritten the will. She had learned that Lady Wexham had discovered the original, and that someone had killed her to protect the lie." Poirot turned to Lady Darnley. "She came to you, didn't she? Not with rage, but with hope." Lady Darnley looked away. "She believed, foolishly, that you would love her, that you would be proud to claim her. But you had spent 20 years building a new life, a new identity, one not touched by scandal, one not shared with Helena's child." Lady Darnley said nothing. Poirot walked slowly across the room. "You smiled." At her, he said, "Not cruelly, not kindly, just finely, the way one does before a door closes. And then you led her to the back stairwell, told her she could leave, that you'd tell the others in the morning, but she never left, because the stairwell ends at the ravine. And the door, madame, was never locked." Gasps filled the room. "She fell," Poirot said, "or so the story would say. But it was not the fall that killed her. It was the smile before it." Lady Darnley stepped forward, slowly. Her eyes were bright, but dry. "She would have ruined everything," she said. "Not because she was wicked, but because she was mine, because she reminded me of who I used to be." Poirot nodded. "And so, you ensured she would be remembered as nothing." A heavy silence settled over the room. Mrs. Grange looked ready to collapse. Colonel Venn turned away. Poirot spoke once more. "It was never the glove, nor the note, nor the alibi that solved it. It was not the scream, nor the candle, nor the name. It was the smile, the one we all remembered and none of us questioned. Because a smile," he said, "can be the cruelest lie of all." He walked past her without another word. Later, as Lady Darnley was taken by the constables, Poirot remained in the study. He stood by the window, watching the light shift over the grounds. A single crow landed on the garden gate and stared back at him. "Human nature, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "does not fall when pushed. It falls when it smiles first."